Namaste. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm here, as always, with my partner in crime, Rachel Coppola, and we are going to do some twisting. We're going to look at 4 twisted postures. I love to say that, twisted postures. We're going to look at 4 twisting postures. Revolved chair pose, so twisted Utkatasana. We're going to look at the revolved high lunge. We're going to look at revolved triangle and revolved half moon. So the Sanskrit Parivrita Trikonasana, Parivrita Ardha Chandrasana, Parivrita Utkatasana, Parivrita Anjaneyasana. So we are going to start, I think, with our chair pose. But before we get into that, I think we were just going to say a few words about the twisting. One of the main components to the twisting is our alignment for our spine. So we do try to first establish that midline, that center axis through the torso. And then there are various adjustments based on the pose that we're doing to accomplish these twists. But it's always good to start from that vertical axis, that center axis, stabilizing and balancing the pelvis as much as we can to begin.
When it comes to twisting, it's wise to remember that each individual vertebrae has its own degree in which it rotates. And it becomes increasingly more open, more able to twist as you go higher into the spine, the neck having the most range of motion. So the lower back and pelvis have the least range of motion, and it increases incrementally up into the cervical spine. We want to keep that in mind as we're creating especially I think the standing poses, the standing twists, where we are creating a stability in the legs and the pelvis. And because of that stability, there's going to be even maybe less mobility in the pelvis, which is going to then affect the amount with which we can rotate into and have, an amount of depth in any given revolved pose.
It's interesting because I sometimes will give the cue, in the twisting, especially from the sitting position, that we're trying to feel the rotation begin at the base, right? And at the base of the spine, right, what you're describing is there's maybe only 5 to 10 degrees, maybe 10 degrees is already really generous of rotation at those lower vertebrae and those lower discs. So as you travel up, you get maybe 6 or 7 degrees, and then 8 to 10 degrees, and then 10 to 12. Each disc you rise higher, even though we say the twisting might originate at the base and we're looking at the pelvis, but we feel that there's this progression going vertically.
Yeah, and the amount of twist that you can garner from the upper part of the spine is going to be affected by, like what you're saying, affected by what you're doing with the pelvis. So if the pelvis stays completely stable and still, then there's going to be a little bit less rotation through the whole of the spine. And if you're going to allow the pelvis to shift, as you're saying, letting that rotation begin sort of at the pelvis, then you're letting the pelvis turn, and that starts the whole rotation, and you get more depth out of it.
And to be clear, right, we're not saying that the spine is able to twist more. It's that because the pelvis turns, you're going to experience the feeling of more rotation in the pose. And where a bind might be involved, or let's say in our revolved triangle, you want to put your hand on the outside of your foot versus the inside of your foot, those hips are usually going to have to give somewhat so that you can make that extra distance. And it's not necessarily that you're twisting the spine more, it's just that you've oriented the base in such a way that now the whole body is turning, versus just rotation itself in the spine. Really, really important thing to look at. And it's kind of yogi's choice, right, Rachel? Wouldn't you say that it's really the practitioner knowing their own body? So sometimes we see in a magazine, like somebody's hips are all crazy, and we say, ooh, that's not a good idea from a first glance because their hips are so turned. But then if you look at the rest of the pose, they're not exploiting anything. They're not overdoing it in the back or their spine, or their hips are fine. And so it's not misaligned. It's not dangerous. Because I think that's kind of the stamp that we're always saying, okay, is it safe? And if it's safe, the alignment is kind of up for debate. But if it's not safe, then the alignment needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We do have to take into account the uniqueness of each of our individual bodies. When you're talking about going deeper into those, like the revolved triangle or binding into some of those poses, you're also now incorporating, as we've talked about, Thomas, in the past, like this, you're incorporating almost like a side bend through the lower spine, that you get a side bend and then the rotation comes from there. And we'll show that when we get on the mat. That's just something to keep in mind as far as what the anatomy looks like when you're going deeper into the pose. So again, it's, as Thomas said, it's not that you're rotating more. It's not that you're getting more rotation out of it. It's actually that you're sort of almost negotiating the alignment a little bit so that you can make the adjustment and go into these different expressions. I almost don't want to say deeper. They're just different expressions of the pose.
Yeah, so important. Such a good distinction. So I think we could probably start with our chair pose with revolved Utkatasana. I think let's both get on our mats, don't you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Both do it, and we'll just kind of talk it through.
Do you want to face the camera? Do you think the side view? What do you feel like is? I feel like they're both useful.
Yeah, because we're twisting. I think both of them are. I think both views are good. So let's do it both ways.
Okay, great.
Do it because we'll do both twists, right? So we'll twist to the right and we'll twist to the left. Let's start face on like we are right now.
Okay.
I'm just saying, since both of us are standing naturally with hands at the hips, this is actually a really good place for people viewing this to begin, because you can kind of get a sense of your pelvis balanced, right? If you shift from one foot to the other, if you kind of let the hips pop out a little bit side to side, you'll be able to get a feeling of the orientation of your pelvis. And this is more or less what we could call level, right? If you put a carpenter's level with the little bubble balanced perfectly in the center, we would try to feel that this is the expression or the relationship of the hips with the floor. And then from there, we'll just bend the knees to a nice, gentle and safe Utkatasana squat. So the pelvis stays in neutral, right? We're not trying to either tuck nor tilt the tail. If anything, it's slightly tilted, but we don't need to scoop under. The arms will take out into goddess pose just to give the shoulders a little bit of a break. And then bringing the palms together, prayer position. And then lifting the elbows up even with the wrists so that you feel like your forearms are level also with the floor. And then we're going to take this into a rotation. I'm going to go to my left. So I'm going to put my right elbow on top of my left thigh, just on the outside. Now, in order to make contact, I need to lean forward a little bit more, fold forward. And that might also mean that I'm sinking a little bit into my hips as well as into the squat. Now for me, since I'm turning to my left, my right knee kind of juts forward. And this speaks to the rotation of the hips that we were just describing. It's a long time to hold this pose like this. So we're going to stand up, lift the arms overhead and straighten the legs. Just take a deep breath in as you reach for the sky, and then exhale the arms coming down alongside your body, hands near your hips, or through the prayer position works beautifully too. So we'll leave that there for right now, just to feel those elements. Rachel, anything you noticed from that first one?
I think the highlighting of the needing to tip the body forward in order to get deep enough into the squat so that you can take the twist and connect the elbow, the arm to the leg. is going to be able to be seen better on this side view. So just be on the lookout for that. All right, I'm going to turn this way just so I can do my opposite twist, because I went to the left there first. So in this version that we're doing, right, we've got the feet together. And we'll take those goddess arms one more time as we sit down into the base of our chair, bringing the palms together, elbows lifting up nice and high. And there's a little pressure, hand to hand here, and rotating now to the opposite direction. So we're going either to your right or left. Right, for me, it's my right side. I'm rotating to the outer right thigh. So my left hip or my left knee is coming forward. But I was correct in saying hip, right? Because it's really that knee is coming forward from the hip. And then you're trying to lengthen both sides of the torso, releasing the connection of the elbow to the knee and the knee to the elbow, the hands pressing down into each other. And you take that twist. Maybe you can add that the head turns as well and you look up towards the ceiling, but that's really hard. Then coming out, again, sweep the arms up, straighten the legs, and release the arms down by your side. All right, that's chair pose.
Yeah, chair pose. So just to illustrate the point that we discussed earlier, now for me, when I was in that squat, my elbow, like the outside of the elbow right there near the base of the tricep is just barely touching on the outside of my knee, outside of my thigh, close to the knee. I've seen people in the pose, they're able to go so deeply that when they come into the twist, it's like their armpit is touching their thigh.
Yes.
And I think in order to do this, this is where that side bend comes in. So almost when I'm twisting, I have to lean a little bit to my right, bend my knees, and then getting my body forward. Because again, I'm trying to almost lower the upper arm or the upper arm bone toward my shoulder rather than my arm bone toward my elbow to my knee. I hope I'm making sense.
That's a spectacular point, especially if I'm thinking ahead, like that's what you would need to do if you were going into side crow. That would be how you would really get the body into side crow. So that approach is going to build the strength for that. But additionally, right, you see the option of sometimes people opening the arms in their side, their revolved chair. So it is going to be like you need to kind of coax that lower back curve. So it's a side bend. Then I hook the tricep. I'm trying to hook the tricep all the way around so that I can reach the hand down and the other arm up. So there's a lot of opening through the right side of my body right now. I'm twisting to the left. And there's a ton of opening through the right side of my back from shoulder down to that hip. But it's because I'm arcing through that lower back and then twisting to make this connection. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That was my point exactly.
All right.
High lunge. Twisting high lunge.
Sure. Twisting high lunge, taking it from Tadasana. Let's take the arms and reach them overhead as you breathe in. And exhale, take the hands to the heart center with the elbows out wide. We're going to take that right leg, lift it up, and step back into our high lunge. So it's a basic sort of step back. Organizing. Right now, in order to do this twist with the elbow to the outside of the knee, we're going to need to sink down into the lunge and then lean forward slightly. Start taking that side bend approach and hooking the right elbow outside of the left knee. Hugging the left hip down, kind of scooping the belly up and around the thigh, and power through the back leg. So here's the option to keep the hands together, or you could take the bottom arm, open it down, fingertips to the outside of the front foot, and the top arm reaches up, head, gaze either straight out ahead of you or maybe you can take it to look up. Going a little deeper, we're going to turn the top arm and fold the arm across the lower back. That's a half bind, where you reach under with the front hand to connect the hands under the leg for the full bind. Slowly unwind. Let's bring the hands to the mat and step the back foot forward, standing forward fold. Take a breath, in and out. And with an inhale, rise all the way up, reaching the arms overhead. And exhale the arms down by your side.
The thing that I always notice about that pose is it's like a trade-off between the stability, right? Because in the high lunge, with the toes pointing straight ahead, you have less stability, yet you have more freedom. So you can twist more because the back heel is off the ground, right? In a revolve, if we were to take that from a Warrior One foundation, or as we'll see in Revolved Triangle, when the back heel is flat, you don't have the freedom in the hips. And one of the reasons why I was kind of unstable in my pose was because that hip freedom was a little bit too much, right? I didn't take the time to stabilize my pelvis. And because that back heel is lifted and the toes are pointing forward, you really have to make sure that the hips are strong to provide the stability, because you're not getting it as much from the legs as you might normally get if the feet were flat. So that actually leads us into, what I just mentioned actually takes us into Revolved Triangle, because it's the same principle, and especially we'll see with both legs straight. So again, let's begin from mountain pose. I'm going to be stepping my left foot back for this one.
I'm going to do the same thing.
Okay, cool. So just as we did earlier, from mountain pose, we'll raise the arms in front, big breath in to reach up, and then we're going to fold with the exhalation, hands wide down to the floor. And from the fold here, step your left foot back and bring your heel to the ground in Warrior One. So initially, the left foot takes a big step back, and then we'll rise up into the lunge. Straighten your right leg, and then bring your hands to your hips. And just as an extra signifier, take the right fingertips and touch the front of your hip bone, right at the top of the thigh in that crease. And then as you use that right hand pulling back, we're going to fold forward. And at some point, your left hand is going to go to the floor, and then you can follow it with your right hand. Now we're going to try to do just a little bit of cat and a little bit of cow to see if there's any motion or mobility in the pelvis. And this is one way that you can feel if your hips are square, if your hips are what you can sense as being parallel with the floor. We're going to hold in cow pose, but please, we're lifting the chest. The pelvis might not move anywhere. We're going to shift the back foot about 6 inches forward. So you're actually shortening the distance from front foot to back foot. Place your left hand on the inside of the right foot, just on the floor, next to your big toe, next to your arch. Bring your right hand to your hip, to your lower back. Lift your chin to open the chest, and then rotating a little bit further, you can look up past your right shoulder. Try to keep the legs straight, both legs strong and straight, and then maybe raising the right arm up into the air. Take just one more breath in. Let your exhalation lower the right hand. And now we're going to move that left hand onto the other side of the front foot. So onto the outside edge, or maybe on top of the right foot if you want to split the difference. Return your right hand to your hip. Remember the element of length that we're trying to create. So the chest opens, the chin can lift, almost like you're trying to look toward the front of your mat or toward the wall out in the distance. And that right arm can reach to the sky when you're ready. Turning the torso the rest of the way. That right arm is largely dependent on the rest of the body turning. So sometimes when we try to reach up from here, if the shoulder meets resistance, See if you can rotate the torso a little more, and then that arm should feel a little bit more free. We'll exhale the right hand to the floor. Bend your front knee, lift the back heel, stepping forward to your forward fold. Head toward your knees for a moment. You can grab your heels and feel the balance. You'll notice often a big difference in the feeling in the hips, in the lower back, elsewhere in the shoulders perhaps. We'll come up really simply, bending the knees slightly, hands to the hips, inhaling as you stand up. We'll come just letting the arms rest as we exhale. Mountain pose, nice balanced posture. So revolved triangle pose.
So I did a version using the block, just to give that example for
Awesome, thank you.
everyone to be able to see how that can be really useful. Well, what I noticed is that there's just a lot of internal rotation. And I don't know that if that is felt sort of by the general public or not, but after coming up from doing those two versions of the pose, I actually looked down at my feet because it felt like my right leg was turned in so much more than my left. You know, it's really exaggerating that internal rotation and stretching the outer hip and hamstring. So I don't know what to do with that other than to just share that.
Yeah, that makes me want to ask you, do you ever cue like a scissoring of the legs? Because I definitely hear what you're saying about the internal rotation. I guess then it makes me think that I also want to contract a little bit through those adductors.
Yeah, I think they naturally jump on board. I mean, it can certainly be something that you highlight, you call some attention around, but I think there's just a natural instinct in the body to use those muscles to stabilize. But there is a ton of stabilization going on around the pelvis there. And that for the version where you put the hand on the outside of the foot, again, you've got a little bit of that side bend that happens in the lower back. And then you've got the rotation that happens. And I know for myself, with a little bit of trouble around the sacroiliac, I do allow my hips to become a little unlevel. So I do let the back leg hips sort of drop down a little bit. Just whatever kind of naturally feels good to the body. I'm not exaggerating that motion, but I am also not locking it back in a way that strains or creates pain into the lower back or sacroiliac area.
A lot of this makes me think too, Rachel, this idea that we learn the rules to break them properly. I think if the hips are tilting, we're just saying no that you're tilting the hips and don't take advantage of it, right? Or if you're keeping the hips really stable and you're keeping the hips level, we could say that's the rule, and the hips going off center is kind of breaking the rules. But again, we're putting our caveats in here, right? So if you are going to keep the hips really level and you're feeling, oh, I can't twist as much, that you then don't force the twist, because you know that the hips are the kind of determining factor for the rotation and opening of the chest and the heart and the torso. So if you're going to keep the hips really solid and rigid, you're going to feel a limit in rotation that you don't want to force, that you don't want to ask too much.
Yeah, I think that's the key word, is never to force yourself into twists, because that's where you can do some harm to the spine, to the body.
This is also making me think, in safety, the twists, we're always applying the twist. It's always like some other pose plus a twist.
Right.
Whether even if it's just Sukhasana, easy pose, you're still in the sitting posture and then you're twisting it. And in these cases, right, we're doing chair pose and twisting. We're doing triangle and twisting. We're going to look at half moon and twisting it. So the twisting is always an add-on, and there is that tendency to use the twist as a way to go deeper. And it is very often that the twist is sometimes the proverbial straw, and that's what takes us over the edge and causes the injury. So Yeah, great point.
Should we look at half moon?
Yeah, let's do it.
We're gonna go just straight from here. So we're gonna take from Tadasana. We're gonna reach the arms up. With a big breath in. And folding forward. Just placing the fingertips down to the mat. Take a moment to breathe here. And then creating a halfway lift. So we're creating lots of length through that upper back and anchoring the feet down into the ground. We're going to take the right hand onto the block underneath the shoulder. And we're going to lift the right leg up like we're doing warrior 3. So you could even peek back there with your eyes to check the alignment of your right leg, toes trying to face the floor. So there's a lot of internal rotation, the inner thigh lifting up. Take your left hand to your hip and start opening the chest to the left. Pressing that right hand down for support and kicking up through the right heel. The left arm can reach to the ceiling as you rotate. And then for added bonus, you might take the eyes up towards the sky. And lowering slowly, bringing the fingertips back to the ground. Lower the right leg next to the left, standing forward fold. Inhale as you rise, hands to hips. And exhale, back to Tadasana. Anything come up for you?
Well, the thing that came up for me was that I never come into that pose that way. Like, it's always, because you know, like revolved half moon, it's like a peak pose, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, like, we're coming into revolved half moon off of something else, like doing something really hard, like going from revolved triangle into revolved half moon, or doing a warrior 3 standing splits into revolved half moon. It's usually like the part of a sequence and it's the end of the sequence, right? Or it's like the peak of the sequence, even in a you know, kind of a smaller contained circuit. So just coming into the pose so simply like that was really so helpful to feel mountain pose, pelvis, and then one leg lift, like you said, warrior 3 pelvis, and then to go into the twisted version in revolved half moon, rotated pelvis, rotated spine. So yeah, that was just really helpful. And I'm thinking about how hard that pose is on its own, just to come into it from a very basic position, let alone have it be kind of the end of a really, really challenging sequence.
Yeah, right, because that hip gets pretty tired. I mean, both hips get pretty tired, but if you're putting it in the middle of a sequence, you want to save enough strength and stamina to be able to try to execute that pose. It can be interesting to take poses out of a sequence and just look at it in its purest essence and figure out what are these elements, because that also helps us to figure out how do they connect when we do find what are we putting this in sequence with. What are the poses that build us up to this? What are the poses that warm us up for this? What are the poses that center our mind and our body into alignment to create the stability for the pose? And then what do we need to do after the pose to recover, right? Like now I'm thinking, oh, I need a good glute stretch for the leg that really got a lot of workout. So it can be really informative in a fun and different way.
So this was super helpful. I'm going to come back to my seat here. This was super helpful, Rachel. Do you have any you know, kind of closing thoughts? Any final remarks on the twists?
One final remark, since we spoke about breath in the How to Cue video, thinking about how to breathe in a twist, right? When you are twisting and you've gotten to the depth of the twist, there is less, I think, less room for breathing in this very sort of slow, deep way in the abdominal region. And so I think the rib cage starts to take more of that breath. And you want to be careful with that, right? Because you want to create like a nervousness in the body, but knowing that that could actually happen, because there's like a difficulty or a feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't really feel like I can breathe here. And so it can create a little panic. And so you want to just be careful and figure out, where can I breathe here in the twist to sort of assist my nervous system and my body to stay present while I'm creating and executing the twist.
Because it's so difficult to breathe in the deepest twists, right? You kind of feel like you're, almost doing Bastrika, or like very small, short bursts. I experience that for sure.
Yeah, and so, right, if you're going to cue a breath, it might not be a good idea to say, take a couple of deep breaths here. It might be that you're saying, breathe however you can to best support this pose, and stick with it, right? Make sure that the breath is moving, that it doesn't get stuck, because I think that's another thing that happens in a twist, is that everything is so almost constricted, right? There's such a sort of a tightening in and a stress, not in a negative way, but just all, like all muscles, all hands on deck in a twist, that you want to make sure that the breath doesn't get held. Yeah, because, the neck also, I find, and I don't know if this is a personal thing, but in a twist, because the neck does have the most mobility, we might wrench the chin or wrench the neck to do the turn, and then we're not sort of equally trying to distribute the twist throughout the entirety of the spine. And if we only, if we allow it to land in one particular section, I know we highlighted a lot about how not to make it land into the lower back, but I think conversely, we need to make sure that it doesn't end up that all of the twist is landing into the neck, because then you're going to create, strain and pain in the neck.
Pain in the neck. And you're making me think about triangle pose too, because a lot of people will be in triangle pose and their head tilts and then they try to turn, right? And one of the cues we get a lot, or the request we get a lot, is in triangle pose, is my head center? So if I'm in triangle pose, I'm not letting my head tip, but I'm keeping it in line even as I'm going horizontal. And then I can turn because I'm still turning on this axis. But if I tilt my head and then rotate, I'm going to meet the limit sooner. And this is kind of a nice stretch, yeah, but it's dangerous, again, if we say, I'm supposed to look up, or I'm supposed to twist, and I'm supposed to. That's why, your cueing was so great. If it makes sense, or if it, forget the wording you used exactly, but like, if you want to go further, look up. But really cautious of that cueing and saying, and not just blanketly look up, right? Oh, I'm supposed to look up. I can't look up. I'm going to force it.
Yeah. That's a really great point, because in the very first alignment asana video, we talked about how all the alignment is based out of Tadasana. And so we're thinking the same thing, even as we get into this really challenging twisted high lunge or revolved triangle pose, it's that we're lengthening the spine, and the head is aligned just like it would be Tadasana, whether it's tilting, the spine and torso to the side, or whether it's tilting it forward, but we're really keeping the head aligned, the neck aligned with the rest of the spine. So it's Tadasana, right? We're revolving Tadasana.
Yep. 100%. 100%.
All right, so play in your own body. We always encourage that, for everyone to play in their own bodies to figure out how to best execute it. And then from there come your greatest cues for communicating that information to your students.
Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next video.
So much. Namaste.
Namaste.